Welcome to this episode of Swishoes. It's the Swishoes podcast, and this week we're talking about dynamic organizations. We'll find out what that means shortly, but in this episode, love to welcome and delighted to have Daniela Dollinger, Martin Eisenhut, and Chris Holmes joining me, Bill Young, in this episode on dynamic organizations. What do we mean by dynamic organizations? What is it? What are we talking about? I'm going to start with you, Daniela, if you don't mind. Would you like to introduce us to what you mean by dynamic organizations? And then I'll move to Martin and Chris.
For me, dynamic organizations, they think of if the classic way of organizing themselves is still a good way of practice. So is it the direction from top to the lower level, so the vertical dimension, is it still the right way of doing work? And if we think of it, we might come to an answer that a horizontal, a more value chain based way of working might be more effective or more valuable or bringing more innovation to the companies.
There are a few buzzwords like teal and self-management and holistic and things like that, but I gather you're not that keen on some of those.
I can go into that. So some companies start with trying to have flat organizations, or sometimes the reaction is, oh, we have that already. We have flat organizations, and then they seem to be fine with it. But if we look a little bit deeper, we have still the same dynamics. The power is still on top of the management, and it's a few people are still making key decisions. Then we have other way of thinking. Some are just implementing the way of using it, role-based working, or trying to overcome these strict job descriptions using roles, and there are more strict ways of organizing it. For example, holacracy, or some are more purpose-driven oriented. For example, the Teal organizations from Frederic Laloux. He started with the reinventing organization, a kind of movement in a more organic way of doing it.
Thank you very much. Martin, what's your take on the name and what it is?
It summarizes all companies who are thinking of different ways of organizing their organization than in a traditional hierarchical way. I always see the pyramid. It's usually a small group of people taking big decisions, and many people move according to these decisions. It's a very fast structure, but there are different ways of getting people involved, getting crowd intelligence into your decision making, having a more fun way of working and taking decisions, and releasing the potential every single human being you have in your company has.
Can you get away from the pyramid altogether? Can it be completely flat?
Yes and no. That would be it depends, I would say. Yes, sure. There are examples who are structured completely without the pyramid. Yeah.
And Chris, what's your take? Do you have a favorite name for these what we're calling dynamic organizations?
Well, I'm not sure necessarily have a specific definition, but and my kind of entry into this has really been over the last year or so, and so I'm learning as I'm going, and so I don't necessarily have a specific name for it either. In that sense, I like the notion of self-managed. Some of the terms like holacracy or whatever, then they can sometimes feel a bit academic in that sense. So I don't tend to like to use those because I think you run the risk of just turning people off. I think the self-managed piece for me is a good way of describing it, but dynamic is also very interesting in that sense. And like most of us, I've spent a lot of my career in corporate life, and so therefore in very traditional settings, but I've seen other settings, sometimes not even realizing it. So yeah, certainly keen to explore that.
I had worked with an organization that was, they called it a self-organizing system. It was taken to quite an extreme. I was very impressed with it. What do you think are the drivers for doing it? What's the case for change? Martin, have you any thoughts about, you work in an organization that does have a variant of a dynamics in it. What's the case for change and what's the difference?
In a nutshell, it's just, is there a more involving way than in a traditional structure? like a pyramid. So we are working in circles. We take the orientation out of Sociocracy 3.0. So we work in circles, we are organized in circles, and we ended there out of the questions. It can't be the best solution that only a few people take all the big decisions. The energy you put into for rollouts, only a small group of people find the concept for any project, and then the energy you put into the rollout process is enormous, and we involve more people in the beginning of a concept to ask what people really need once we start the project. So the question is just, how can we involve people more who are actually living with the decision that have been taken?
I find that really interesting, because I think you think about any change management in any kind of large organization, there'll always be efforts, or I shouldn't say always, but predominantly there'll be efforts to make sure that people's voices are heard and that they're somehow brought into the mix. But I suspect, to be maybe cynical about it, I suspect we've all probably had experience of, the voices are all sought at the beginning, but the reality is the decision's already made about this is what we're going to do, and we'll make some efforts to make it feel like we're including people. I'm sure there'll be lots of people that would kill me for saying that, but we've all been through that one way or another. So I find it really interesting that driver of actually really bringing that to life. That's powerful to me.
That's my experience as well. That having had this association with a firm that was with an organization that was doing it, there were people I would not have expected to be contributing so much as they did. Space was given to them and they contributed a lot. I was very impressed.
Yeah, my thoughts on this, because you were asking of the case for change. When we talk with companies, with senior leaders, it's not often the case for change when they start thinking of it, what Martin was describing. It's more, in most cases, it's more they realize that the own organization in some areas are fragile or not stable or not resilient or not speedy enough. They would like to overcome that things take so long or the things are not going through the organization. So in a classic way of describing is they need speed, they need agility, and they need the responsiveness to the market. So this is one starting point at the beginning when we start conversations. And the other part are the people sometimes. They are not attractive to talents and they don't receive enough applications. And they think of how can we become more attractive? Because in some cases, we use the story as well. If we overthink the way of how we work, you as an organization will be more attractive to talents. And we see that if we look at the pioneers, people have listening to this podcast, they can listen to the Zukunftspioniere podcasts as well, because there the companies describe why they started and one reason, and where they ended in the situation. In some cases, they have even more applications as they need to. I don't know how the shift has happened at Transa, where Martin is in, but this is what companies are describing after 2, 3, 4 years of changing their system.
I would like to jump in here because attractiveness should be a consequence and not a goal. Like, never structure a company to be attractive. I think if you do it right, it will be attractive. Or not even if you do it right, if you do it with your whole soul and the culture is living it, then it will be attractive. Speed versus agility. I think the traditional pyramid hierarchical structure is the fastest structure we know. That's why first responders are organized in a pyramid with one chief of whatever, and many people move according to this decision. I think agility, like changing your structure all the time, that's the point, especially in circle organizations. You can change your structure fast and according to questions, according to market needs, according to whatever need you have, but you're not, you're agile. That's the point. Fast, that will be the big question. In my opinion, you're slower in decision making because you involve people early in the process, but you're much faster in applying or getting to the results. Decision making is much faster in the traditional hierarchical way, but then you have to roll out and you need the acceptance of the people, and that takes a long time if you get even the acceptance in the end. Or you need tools like goals or pressure, like bonuses, whatever.
Really interested in both of the points, really. I think that notion of agility is interesting, again, compared with many corporates where there's certainly lots of reorganization and restructuring that goes on a lot of the time, and there are stats on how successful that is or isn't, and it's more isn't than is. And so that notion of agility, but I like the fact that you kind of touch on the fact that it's not necessarily the fastest way of doing it. And of course, a lot of people default to, well, yeah, but I want to go fast, But I like that notion of the circles help us to be more agile, but also more adaptive, which I think most corporations really struggle with being adaptive and reacting to or predicting how we should organize for a future scenario.
Both of you are highlighting or pointing out a difference between adaptiveness or agility and speed. And I think a lot of people conflate those and think they're much the same thing. But I hear both of you saying you can be adaptive and agile, but that can take time to reach a decision and action. And the pyramid is faster in emergency services, obviously.
In decision making, yes.
I fully agree if we separate it. When I was making the point, I was more on what's triggering the senior leaders to start. But I fully agree what Martin is saying. Because if we divide the decision-making from bringing it into life, I fully agree on that. Because at the end, we need the people who are using it or doing it. And if the people doing it resist, this will cost a lot of energy and time and money at the end. I experience that as well. The more we integrate them earlier and make them part of the decisions, the decision itself will be maybe a bit slower, yes. But what about making them learn to make their own decision at the end and they act in the way of having the whole company? Let's be clear. Today, when I have, as an employee, I have to focus on my little piece. I don't understand the silo next to myself, left or right. And if we start working together and make decisions together, then I start to understand why we are prioritizing that way or the other way. And then we end up in the situation where decisions might be faster, even after a couple of years.
That's interesting. You mentioned silos. Now, a lot of companies will say, oh, we work cross-functionally. We don't have silos here. How much they mean it and how much is just words, I don't know. You prefer the term, when you're launching this and trying to make it happen, you quite like the term mobilizing rather than implementing it. What are the first steps? How do you mobilize towards a truly dynamic organization?
Maybe I need to clarify that I personally come from that classic change management arena as well. So that's why I know all the tools. I have the experience how to implement things. I'm coming from the software scenery, and I did all this. But I realized when the more complex the questions are, the classic way of implementing things don't work, exactly because we have all the resistance from the people. The more complex the questions are, we need those different perspectives. And mobilizing, for me, means that we focus not just on you have to or you have to because you are in this role or in this function or in this job. Maybe the person doesn't want to, but if we look at the company as a whole organic system and we identify the people they love to create the future, they are intrinsic motivated. And if we identify those and start with those people, then we have a power team focusing on the future, and they are the people going first. So at the starting point, we are not talking about structures. We are talking about learning, growth, stimulating what is possible, what are the way of doing in other companies, or what can we learn from other branches also. They start to learn. And with this in the backpack, they have the self-confidence, for example, for new topics like AI or a new organization or role-based working, whatever. They have own experience. And we end up in a situation that they are the multipliers, the positive leaders in an indirect way, not in a formal way, but they lead a topic or they are bringing the new thoughts in teams or in the companies.
And is there a danger that this group of enthusiasts, or you didn't use that word, but self-motivated enthusiasts for it, is there a danger they get out of touch, that they move forward and get detached from the rest of the organization, who just then don't so much follow them as just saying, oh, they're off doing their own thing?
That would happen if we would put them out. But if you leave them in their key job, they just do it for half a day a week or maybe a day in a month. They do it in parallel to their job. They are still integrated in the whole structure.
It's basically what Daniela said. For me personally, it's the better approach, like getting these enthusiasts together and personalize the change and seeing people actually having fun, trying new things. It becomes like a game if you have a good group of people. And it's not about their title or function. It's just people who like changing something. And it doesn't matter where they are coming from in the company. And that's a good change team. And then you just go, you try things out and you get your experience. And for me, that's the fun way to do a reorganization. It can be different or it can be traditional, like holacracy has a written set of rules and you know exactly how the new structure should be, how it works, how you get operative. That goes quite fast and you can implement it as a reorganization and that works, but then the culture needs to change. And then you are at the same point as where Daniela started. A cultural change for a new structure which we have never seen or not used to. We have no idea how it's gonna be to live in the structure. Let me give you this example. I worked for, like, I listened to podcasts, I read books, I tried to understand like the theory of circle organizations or holacracy or whatever you need. But living in it, it's a completely different thing. I knew a lot, but I had no chance to know how it feels like. So the cultural change, everybody needs to learn, every single individual, and as a culture that you can't implement. That's not a project. It needs that culture of let's try something, give us time, let's make mistakes, let's go on, and keep the focus of the company while doing that.
It's really interesting for me, and Martin and I spoke about this when we first met. It's this notion of, and Daniela, you talked about talent earlier on, and it's that notion for me that I was kind of going, well, how does this work for people joining the company who've never worked in that kind of environment before, and all of a sudden they're coming into an environment that operates in a totally non-traditional way from their perspective, and they're looking for, you know what, I'm used to being in a box, this is what I do. Now, everybody, I think, would want to do more in that sense and be given more freedom. But that's easy to say. It's much harder to actually then operate that way yourself, you know, to then come in and go, yeah, you know what, I love this. There's far less structure than I'm used to, or formal structure than I'm used to. So I just wonder about that piece of how you onboard people actually into an organization that are coming from outside.
Before I give you an idea or an answer, Chris, to your question, I would refer and add an example in terms of how challenging it could be to behave in a setup like this. Because I remember a company with about 900 people, and then we started in this with those intrinsic motivated people. They called them future makers. When we then divided or found the communities, each community worked on a dedicated topic or question. What happened at the beginning, it was a classic way of being in a meeting. There might be in a community a boss of employee or even 3 hierarchies above from this person. And as soon as this person was in the room, the normal employee was not speaking up anymore. Those small cultural dynamics was not, it was easy to observe, but it was not easy to overcome. When we started, we just focused on, here is the meeting, here is the right place for not thinking of hierarchy. So we didn't do anything about the classic teams they're working in. If you have the normal meetings, you can behave this way. But here, we don't focus on hierarchy. We are all the same. And here we have a facilitator, here we have a topic, and everybody can speak up. We need to learn this. It was easier, coming now a little bit to Chris' questions, it was easier for them to differentiate. Here is the playbook is a little bit like this in this arena, and there are other rules in this arena, and people could experience this. To Chris' question, it's easier for people to adapt if the culture is this in that way, because a lot of people behave like that. Then the other way around, if we would like to change the culture when it's totally different.
I like that. And I'm sure we've all lived and breathed that one way or another. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny. I didn't think that I'd worked in an organization that necessarily worked this way. But when I was thinking about it before, I worked in a consultancy about 200 people 20 odd years ago, not specifically organized that way, but much more akin to that, just because the nature of teams that are in clients, folks in the kind of back office, but also just that nature, it's much more fluid in a consulting organization in terms of you can be working in multiple different areas at the same time. You're not in functions in the same way that you are in a conventional company, if you like, in that sense. So there was a lot more of that. And to your point, absolutely makes sense. That notion of, well, it was relatively easy to join because everybody operated in that way. Yes, it took a bit of getting used to, but it was the norm. So it was easier to get used to.
I think Daniela has highlighted something fascinating for me. It occurred to me that a lot of people think these if I can call them self-managing structures, they associate it with chaos. And they think, that's just chaotic. That's just randomness. How can that ever work? But actually what I'm hearing is that it's far from that. There appears to be a set of rules and guidelines and behaviors and norms that you have to adhere to in order for it to work. And in order to overcome these barriers of existing positional power and personal power and elites that would otherwise smother anything you try to do, that is absolutely fascinating. And in the organization where I experienced this, they had a very, very rigid onboarding, and you could not join the organization until you'd been through this onboarding, in which you learned about the team wanted consent, not consensus. A group decision was a group decision, and you went along with it. Not everybody had to agree. That was one of a number of different rules they had, but they had rules. It was far from chaos. That was fascinating. Thank you.
It's really quite the opposite. It is even, I think it's even more structured than before. There is a lot of transparency, and you can't hide behind your title. You can't hide behind your job description, because you take the responsibility for a role and the results. And it's unforgivable, basically. If you take a group decision, if everybody knows which roles you have and you don't deliver, you just get out of your role. And it's the other side of the coin. Like when you talk about transparency, everybody says, yes, transparency. But the other side of the coin is it's quite unforgivable. You see every single character, if he takes responsibilities or not. If he's hiding behind decisions or the management, you can't do that anymore. And smaller circles are like, you still need a strategy, you still need goals, you still need whatever tools we know from a traditional company, but the decision making is different. Yeah, it's quite the opposite of unstructured or everybody can do whatever he wants. That's definitely not the case.
So, Martin, apart from a set of rules and guidelines and policies and what have you for operating it, how does it affect the actual culture of the people?
Yes, well, thanks for asking. Yeah, it changed a lot, and you can see it in every single meeting. Like, as I said before, we work a lot with patterns from Sociocracy 3.0. And you don't even need to have circles. It's just that the way of working with people, how it's described in S3, as we call it, it just makes it more humane to work and to run for results. Let's leave it there.
So it's humane, but it sounds tough as well. You know, if you're being held to account for things you take responsibility for, that doesn't sound an easy situation.
Yes, but if you have the room to create your own work, to do what you like more or less, of course, it's still a company and you don't like everything, but the majority of your work you can create yourself. People want to deliver results. They want to go forward. They want to be creative. They want to be part of something big. So it's kind of, what can you offer as a company? Like how much guidelines do you really need to get the results? I think that's the big change, to get a set of rules working, because a set of rules people don't like to be managed. They actually like to get the results, but they need to understand the bigger picture. They want to take decisions and they are responsible. To take that away, if you have someone who only works for 40% a week, 2 days in a week, and just wants to have a job, there is also roles for that, and which is fine. Not everybody needs to grow in the company. They're all small roles, and everybody has its place. But if you can deliver the room and be creative to change something, it actually might be fun.
Brilliant. But what happens if you are in a big company with lots of rules? It might be aerospace, it might be pharmaceuticals, very compliance focused, yes, multi-divisional. I'm going to have to ask Chris for his opinion on this one. How do you get away from the need for compliance and order and structure?
It's an interesting question. I think that there's elements of, you can't get away from the compliance part. I mean, clearly for pharmaceuticals, for aerospace, whatever, those things, those rules exist beyond the boundaries of the firm anyway, and for good reason. I guess the question I would have then is how to rethink what an organization would look like that needs to operate in that environment. And as with any organization, you have to understand the environment you're operating in anyway, and where there are things that are fixed in stone that you can't change versus where are the things that we can play with or that we can stretch or bend or whatever. But I've no idea, frankly, how you would go about doing this in a company the size of, say, some of the big pharmaceutical players in Switzerland, for instance. I'm not saying you can't. I've just got I'm not the expert, so I've got no idea how you would go about making that kind of change, to be honest.
Well, you'd have the culture that their existing culture would be there, wouldn't it? And it tends to be pretty top down, pretty American hierarchic in many big companies. But is it possible, I'll have to ask Daniela on this one, is it possible to do this in pockets? In a company where there is a top-down hierarchic, compliance-focused, personal targets and what have you, culture, can you take a pocket, a small group in a function and work on this methodology? And if you do, how do you work with everyone else?
Thanks for pointing that out. And the short answer is yes. Yes, you can do it. There are examples. I'm coming back to the compliance piece. Look at Bayer. Bayer is in the middle of a transformation, and it's a huge company in a compliance area. And observe them, what they do with their dynamic shared ownership model. Look at an industry like Everlands. They have at least in the after sales arena, the dynamic collaboration model now. They started at the beginning of this year. It's not that all the other departments are working that way. No. Can we do it? Yes. The key is that we need to define or think of the boundaries and how we work together. And people they are not stupid. They know exactly how it feels like working in a hierarchy, and they know that the other departments might have a classic boss, and now I need to go via this boss. And even if you have a whole company changed, working that way, then you have the boundary with your partners and suppliers. They work that in another way. You always have boundaries. We need to think of them and define how we go through it. And if we have a role like, you are responsible for the budget and it's not the previous boss anymore, this is a minor change, yes. But if we cannot make it happen that a key customer is happy with that, we will find a solution maybe. And coming back to your question can you do it in pockets? Even in a transformation, I like to start that way. Again, starting with the future makers or intrinsic motivated people, the next step would be starting with departments. They are interested and they are open for it. This is the next level of experience before we have the whole company. Especially if we are not focusing on 20, 30 people, we have a couple of hundreds or even thousands of people, then you should do it in pockets.
So Chris was going to come in on that, but you mentioned a big company buyer. A lot of people ask, is this scalable? They can imagine applying it to a small group, small company with 100 or 200, maybe even 1,000. They can't imagine applying it to a multifunctional company, but is this the way in which you would scale it up with pockets of mobilization and then spreading, or?
Especially when we don't have this buy-in from the CEO and we have this top-down way of doing it, then I think it's the only way to do it the other way around, to make it more organic, to make it more natural, to make it more human. And then we see where today there is a boundary for not going further, but maybe in a couple of years we are open for it. But you can do both. And I'm looking forward to this case, if it will scale, if other companies are looking to those. And I'm looking forward to their benefits if they really make it in the terms of innovation, in terms of cost, where they end up. So, and this could be a very good example for large companies.
It's interesting. I think as we go through the conversation, it's making me think about different parts of my own career where maybe some of this has sort of been happening and not even necessarily aware of it, if you like. But not a perfect example by any means, but I think it relates to this notion of culture. And of course, the companies are not monocultures. And you know, when I worked at Novartis, for instance, I worked in the research division for a few years in the US. And the research division was deliberately not headquartered in Basel. It was headquartered in the US, in Cambridge, because they wanted to get access to talent, but also there was a deliberate separation from the commercial organization of a big pharma company. And the culture in NIBA, the research division, was entirely different from Basel or anywhere else in Novartis in that sense. And it's not to say it wasn't hierarchical, because it certainly had, you know, its elements of hierarchy. Science tends to organize differently, obviously, just the nature of how you're doing it. It was a very distinct decision by the company to do that, which we can debate about whether it was successful or not. But it also makes me think about another question really relating to the boundaries of the firm, and this notion of, well, what does it mean for how you interact beyond the boundaries of the firm? So whether it be on the customer end of things or on the supplier end of things, having spent most of my career in procurement, I could certainly think about it creating a difference in how we interact with suppliers, or how suppliers have to interact with us if we're organized in this different way. So yeah, interested to see just kind of how you think about that, well, both Martin and Daniela.
I would like to say something like when I listen to us, and it's the same in every company, we always talk about system A or system B. How do we get to system B? For me, after these so many years, it's like I don't really care about the framework anymore, because what you learn is the structure needs to help the company wherever you are in your process. If you start with, we need to change our structure and we need to have circles, then you're very close to that reorganizations part. Asking the question, which is the right structure for our company? And structure is basically, for me, it's nothing else than an agreement how we want to work. It doesn't really have to be the same framework. Of course, if you have the same framework, you're more efficient, like the efficiency thought comes in. But in between, you need to ask many different questions. How can we change something? What you learn is you get tensions because you have, like, your team wants to change something, your next team doesn't want to. But having a tension is actually the creative part of changing. So staying in that position where I want to work like this and you want to work like that, that's the creative part, because we need to talk to each other and we need to find solutions, what actually works. That weaves it into the culture of, hey, we have a different opinion. Let's talk about it. Let's find the right solution. And you don't have, sorry for that picture, but you don't have a manager who comes into you and tells you how to organize. That's the cultural change. The cultural change is in between A and B. And from my perspective,
sorry, system A and system B, is this the reference to the top-down hierarchy?
Yeah, it's like when Bayer or any company says, hey, we want to restructure, reorganize, and we want to do that. We are back to the point of implementing or changing as it goes. Like the risk of we want to have it done in between X X amount of months or a year. Cultural wise, it can be too fast. And the creative process is between a solution. Once you're able to ask the question, then the actual learning process starts. Having a solution, that's the boring part. When the decision has been taken or you arrive at the target, then it's the past. The interesting part is how do we deal with not being on the same stage? And that's the cultural change. It's exactly where you need time as a company to be in between solutions.
In this mobilization piece, is it necessary or is it helpful or is it even distinctly unhelpful to sit down and start redesigning organization charts, the formal organograms? What role do they play in this? Are they an essential bedrock of moving forward? You have to change them, readjust them, or do you throw them out and let them continue to exist, but actually this is the real way we do things?
Both and it's I think making a picture of how it should be and start changing on paper, it actually helps, but holding on to it would be the biggest mistake. Drawing a picture of the world you want to live in helps you asking questions where you want to go. So to make the picture clearer, what you actually want to have. You don't want to have the circle, but you want to have the consequence of having a circle. So it helps getting to understand what you're actually looking for. And once you start moving, change the picture every single day.
Anything to add to that, Daniela?
Maybe I share what comes up into my mind when I'm listening to you is I fully agree people need orientation. And in the classic world of working, maybe the orientation was the boss and the org structure. More pieces clearly, but to nail it a little bit down. And we need maybe other ways of giving orientation. And I was having a little smile on my face listening to you, Martin, because we sometimes start with creating a picture of the future. So a real drawn picture together with the guys. And in some cases, this gives more orientation that all process views or defined rules or the org structure itself, because even in a classic organization, you can have an org structure and the people don't follow strictly that way. It's just how we are organized in a system or how we are formally structured. But in a new world, you need alternatives, and those visuals, those pictures, they give a lot of orientation too. And sometimes new business models, you can draw a picture. What does it mean for us as a company or for a team? And this could be helpful, giving orientation.
Can I add something to that? Because it's so strong. Telling stories is the oldest way of passing information. Why? It's the same like drawing a picture. It has feelings, emotions, ideas, spirit. It's not only brain. It's not only the rational brain, because it has it delivers so much more. And that's really important. I think it's great drawing pictures, telling stories.
And even every person can see his or her own story in it.
Yes.
But this is not something negative. This is something positive because this allows them a new or more creativity.
It's human nature. It's actually accepting who we actually are. We are not only brains. We are 90% not brain. Like all the impulses we get, our body works on is 90% not in the rational brain. And that's how you make clever decisions. It's asking, like including your body and the energy in the room. And that's what you can, or it's easier to do that with in a consent decision making than in a boss decision making or in a fast decision making. It actually, the quality wins because there's the picture is so much broader if you include energy, spirit, feelings, ideas, and not only facts and figures.
And maybe I would like to add, even 99% of all of our thoughts are the same than the day before. That means we repeat the same things. And working as a transformation consulting, I'm always looking for how to stimulate, how to not support the old way of thinking, how to irritate it to make us aware of what we need right now.
I can add to that if you want. We started working with the 4 seasons. So everybody, if you can relate to spring where the energy goes up and the plants are small, and the summer where the energy is bright and fast and productivity comes in, and in autumn where you get all the fruits from the trees and whatever. And then is wintertime. Wintertime, the energy goes in, it gets quiet, you look to the stars, you ask questions of what is this all about? And that's the moment where you create new ideas. It is silent, it has not a lot of noise, it's officially not productive, because productivity time is in summer, and that's where the new ideas come in. So I totally agree. We try to implement that in projects, in our culture, having winter time, because our society is too fast, too many things, too many ideas, too fast, not enough autumn, reflection time, feedback time, and certainly not enough winter qualities. So it's not a coincidence that we have so many burnouts, because the whole society burns out. We are too fast, without any winter qualities in our life.
This is inspiring.
Yeah, I love that description. That's really good.
Yeah, very good. We do need to finish, unfortunately, but before we do, this is not a brand new topic. People have been talking about this System A, System B, and about open cultures for some time. But it does seem to have had a recent rebirth. What about the future? With working from home, with AI, job replacement possibly, but certainly working with AI, the talk about Gen X, Y, Z, all the rest of it. How do you three, and we don't have long for this, so as brief as you can be, if possible, I know that's not fair. How do you see this movement towards dynamic collaboration moving forward in the future in your organizations and in society and industry?
Thank you for making me think. And even the last question is making me think. So I'm going back to the past a little bit. If we look how long it took to make the next level, to come up with new paradigmas, to overthink how we work or what our priorities are in life or in an organization, it took 100 years. So all those new things you're mentioning, Bill, they are challenging us. But if we take them seriously and use our winter meetings and think of them, we can be very creative with it and come up with new setups, better setups. So I see it as a chance. Those things are helping us thinking of how could it be easier, better. And I like what Martin said. In some cases, it's really fun.
Yeah, investing in who we are. We are human beings, part of nature. We are the best species, or the most specialized species in regulate emotions, being adaptable. So stop finding frameworks who are static. We live in a dynamic world. That's our basic. We have in our body. We have all the tools we need to be in a dynamic environment. Try to find purposeful work. I think that's the challenge all companies have. Find your purpose, which is more than your core business, and have fun while being with human beings.
This is a learning journey for me, and I'm just fascinated to go deeper into it. But I'll keep it really short. I think as a passionate skier and someone who absolutely loves winter, maybe what Martin described earlier has absolutely kind of lit the touch paper for me in terms of I need more winter time. That's for sure. So,
well, look, that's been absolutely wonderful. I'd like to thank Daniela Dollinger, Martin Eisenhut and Chris Holmes for absolutely fascinating discussion. As we come to the end, I'll say goodbye from all three and from me, Bill Young, and we'll close this episode of Swishoos on dynamic organization. Until the next time, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.